talk about talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo. Where you question where you fit and every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course, and it is Thursday, so it means it's time for our Thursday Trends episode. And on the show today, we are going to be talking about a Texas high school that has banned their homecoming queen from attending a school event that is tradition because she wore a sash at graduation that was unapproved. We'll get into it, of course. She's a brown woman celebrating her brownness and now got in trouble for that. Surprise, surprise. So we'll talk a bit about that. I also want to touch on this story that I found on TikTok that happened at a Dior fashion show, but it brings up the conversation that we had on the previous episode about what it means to be Latin enough. And oftentimes the qualifications of whether or not you speak Spanish sort of makes it like a prerequisite whether or not you're allowed into this club of being a real Latino, right? So we'll talk about that. Also paired with a really interesting Pew Research study that came up actually talking about how many non-Spanish speaking Latinos have felt shame from their own community. Surprise, surprise. So we'll talk about that. We'll also touch on Tyson and Purdue, the meat companies that they produce a lot of chicken. They're under investigation by the Department of Labor for child labor violations. So we'll talk about that. And then in our Mi Gente segment, I'm not gonna lie, y'all, I'm kind of torn on this one if it is a positive or a negative. So we'll talk about that. It's a new series from Sofia Vergara, who's gonna be producing and starring in it. She is playing a controversial figure, I guess you could say, in Latin history. On the positive side of things, it is an all Latin cast. On the negative side of things, it perpetuates a stereotype that Hollywood loves to kind of run with, right? So we'll talk about it. First and foremost, so let's get into the nonsense, the BS, in a segment we call For the People in the Back.
Say it louder for the people in the
All right, so let's first start with this high school in Texas, right? So you have a homecoming queen being banned from a school event, right? So as reported by KHOU 11, Brazosport High School in Freeport, Texas, did not invite last year's homecoming queen, Kaylee Craddock, to their event this last Friday. The school event traditionally invites the former year's homecoming queen to crown the new one. However, this time around, Craddock cannot attend because she, quote, wore an unapproved sash to her graduation in May. Oh my goodness. The controversy. She was wearing a sash that wasn't approved. Oh my God. Send her in jail. Where are the handcuffs, right? Now, according to CNN, Craddock wore a special, they're calling it a stole. I don't know. Stole. I'm just going to call it a sash, representing her Mexican heritage during graduation in May. Fast forward to this month, and the student was excited to go back for her high school, event, to crown the new homecoming queen as tradition dictates. However, her mother, Cynthia Vasquez, told CNN that the school's principal called her to inform her that her daughter could not attend. The decision was based on Craddock's graduation sash. Now, the Brazosport Independent School District explained in a statement to We Are Me Too, quote, unfortunately, a student wore an unapproved sash that was not in guidelines for graduation dress. Because of the insubordination at the graduation ceremony last May, the graduate was not invited to participate in the crowning of this year's homecoming queen. Now, Craddock told KHOU 11 that her sash was a show of pride for her Mexican heritage, saying, quote, I want to represent my culture. I love being Mexican, and I will forever be proud. However, the school district told We Are Me Too that the student was asked to comply with the dress guidelines and refused. Their issue with Craddock's sash was that, quote, school policy addresses the wearing of unauthorized sashes and accessories. The district also asserted, quote, graduation guidelines are communicated to all students. Still, Craddock told KHOU 11 that the school's policy on wearing the sash to graduation was more unclear than that. my first sort of response and inclination in reading this is, who gives a fuck? The kid is graduating high school. They just busted their ass to get through all of this fucking schooling and is crowned the homecoming queen. And you're going to sit here and trip them up over something like this. And then you're holding a grudge that the next year you're going to break into tradition and say that this is their punishment. Like, give me a fucking break. Like, this touches on I feel like a lot of different nerves that I have, particularly let's talk about school. Like, is it really that fucking serious? These kids have busted their ass to make it to graduation. So what if the sash doesn't, fit in whatever fucking guidelines that you have? And by the way, there are pictures of it. I'll post the link in the show notes on We Are Me Too. But it's not like it was anything offensive, right? It literally was like, it looked like it was the flag and it was black. I'm not sure if it was because of color. That's why it wasn't approved or whatever it was. But who gives a shit? Like, this is again, I think this is a commentary on the world that we live in, that like every chance it gets tries to strip us of our individuality. Like, for me, that's the bigger thing that I see that upsets me here. Because these are asinine rules that A, don't have to exist, but B, don't have to be that serious of a thing, right? Like, the school doesn't have to be hard asses about this, and maybe they make a comment during graduation, but then the following school year you break in tradition because you want to hold a grudge from last year. Like, how does that make any? Well, who is that helping? Like, what is that actually doing, right? Like, this person is no longer even a student there; they're an alumni. Like, you're really that mad about it, and like as if they did something so egregious. If they vandalized the school, if they were disrespectful in some sort of way, I get it. But because they broke in an asinine dress code, you're trying to punish them. And again, like, I hate to be the one playing race cards, but I wonder if this was a sash bearing the American flag, right? Or bearing the Italian flag or something like that, would the uproar be there? Would this person be banned, right? Like, and that's, and I could be completely wrong here in saying that, right? I'm not above saying maybe I have my own biases based upon, my own frustration with small town America. But, the very fact that I even have to question that kind of shows you the type of world that we exist in, right? The fact that that's even a consideration, because this is something so silly and so stupid. But again, I think like the bigger picture sort of thing here is like, what are we doing in schools, right? I'm going to use this as a moment to get on my soapbox and talk about the fucked institution that is the American school system, right? And again, this is proof that they are literally just asking people to conform and give up parts of themselves. Like, what is this teaching, right? So you're telling me that my individuality, me wanting to take a moment to celebrate myself for all the hard work I put in, and wanting to celebrate my culture and be proud of it, and the fact that I get to be homecoming queen and that I get to walk across that stage, and I want to do something that allows me to feel like I'm, making a bigger point or expressing myself fully, right? Me expressing myself fully makes you uncomfortable, therefore it's banned, right? Like you're doing more harm, right? Like schools, and I'm like kind of going all over the place because it's so frustrating. I'm just trying to figure out the way to like vocalize this and articulate it in the best way possible. But schools are there to mold the minds of young children, right? Like, what is school if we really break it down? The goal of school is to prepare, kids for from a certain age up to a certain age to be prepared for the real world, essentially, right? Your job there is to give them tools and a skill set that they can then apply to the real world that gives them the best chance for not only survival, but hopefully living, their best life, right? The problem that ends up happening oftentimes when you have places of authority and people being put in positions of authority is that their authority or the institution itself becomes bigger than the purpose. And that is a disservice to the whole reason behind what school is supposed to be. This goes in so many different forms of life, right? It's why like things like power corrupt people and money corrupt people, because you can get drunk off of things like that, and then you get sort of fooled into deviating further and further away from your purpose, and you end up sort of bowing down to like authority, bowing down to power, bowing down to money, right? Those become your gods at the end of the day, right? Those become your guiding light rather than the purpose that was initially set out for, right? And that's the problem with school is like the school system itself, those put in positions of power through societal norms and tradition have all adapted a mindset and a philosophy that the institution is bigger than the goal itself. And that's why a school system like this one is so offended by the fact that this person wanted to do something special for themselves in that moment, wanted to express themselves fully in that moment, right? And they would rather sully the memories that this person potentially had in that school system, at that school. They would rather do that in the name of their institution, their authority, their power, rather than allowing that person to celebrate themselves and show up authentically with which what I would argue is going to be a far better experience for them being able to show up in the real world and be happy, right? Which, again, is supposed to be the goal of school. Supposed to give you the tools so that you can survive in the real world. And what better of a tool should there be than somebody having confidence in themselves, in their authenticity, to then be able to show up and take up space and be successful in whatever they choose to do, right? But again, the institution itself, because of societal norms, of conformity, of power, and all of the above, every other thing I can add into that, those things have now become more important than the purpose that was behind the institution of school, right? Like that's sort of a lot of the ass backwards methodology that we see in this country, right? The people who are like, oh, it's unpatriotic to critique the government. What? When this government was created, they literally wrote in the Constitution our ability to critique it. They recognize the importance of holding those in power accountable. But now, the powers that be, through corruption, through abuse of power, have fooled you into thinking that the institution itself is more important than the people that it's supposed to represent, right? The people have always come first, or in theory, are supposed to have come first. That's why the founding fathers created the experiment that was the United States of America. They, the people, felt like they weren't being represented by the institution, the British government, therefore said, we need to take this into our own hands and create a government for the people, by the people. But the problem with our society today is that corruption has seeped itself into every crevice of our very existence, and to the point that the powerful, those a part of the institution, have now fooled us into believing that the institution itself is more important than the people it's supposed to represent. Ignoring the fact that this country was created for the sole purpose of giving the people the respect and attention and representation that they deserved, because it recognized that the people of this country should come first, not the institution. And this school thing is a perfect example of that. School doesn't teach you to be successful in the real world. It teaches you how to follow the rules of society. And granted, some of that does lead you to, I guess, certain forms of success. but it's not what brings out the best in each individual person. And that is an example of where we've gone wrong. We're so obsessed with these asinine man-made rules that we prioritize them over what is actually best for the people we're supposed to be serving. A school is supposed to be serving its student body. Instead, it's making its student body serve it. And it's get in line or get out, right? We don't care if this experience may hurt you in your future or take away some of the confidence you're going to need to take on the world. All we care about is what's best for us, the institution, even though we have been hired to serve you. Same thing with police. People forget that police are public servants, yet they walk around, generally speaking, because of the societal norm that's been created, they walk around as if we're here to serve them when it's the other way around, right? We pay for their salaries. Our tax dollars do. Yet they throw their weight around and their power around and carry themselves in a way that protects themselves and police culture as a whole first, rather than the very people who are paying for their salaries and that they've been hired to protect and serve. I'm gonna put a what is it, a tack in it there? Is that what a pin in it? I'm gonna put a pin in it there, because I could go on about this for hours and hours, and I want to get to some of these other stories. But again, like, these are just examples of that. And then this is also probably just, white supremacy, racism, all at its finest as well in this specific instance. Equally frustrating. Either way, even if it's not race related or any of those things, equally frustrated, because I'm equally frustrated, I should say, because there is nothing about this that speaks to the school itself doing its job. And that's what's frustrating. And then they have the nerve to double down and defend it. It's just like, our society really needs a wake-up call in so many different ways. Beyond politics, it's just like culture-wise. Like we forget these industries, these people, like, they're supposed to be serving us. Again, the school system, our tax dollars pays for that unless it's a private school. And even then, our money still pays for that private school in the literal sense. It's a service industry. It's supposed to be a service industry. But they've fooled us into thinking we should just be happy to be there. Again, it's another just like perfect example of where our country is going wrong. And I'll leave it there. I'm going to be really fucking fired up on this episode. I apologize in advance because we're getting to like a couple topics that are really near and dear to my heart right now. I'm going to... Do I want to do the Purdue chicken one first or this other? I'm gonna break it up a little bit because the Purdue chicken one also, I think, is an example of our country and the problem with it. Let's talk about our community specifically for now. All right, so I was on TikTok scrolling around this morning, and I saw a really interesting post by a creator at Fernanda Cortez X, and she was talking about this like backlash that's been happening through a video that was posted. So there was this video at a Dior fashion show, and you had the actresses Anya Taylor-Joy, Jenna Ortega, and Rachel Zegler all sitting together. Somebody says something to one of them in Spanish. Anya Taylor-Joy, who it looks as white as humanly possible, but actually is Argentinian and lived in Argentina for a while, speaks Spanish. She's the only one who answers back in Spanish and sort of like carries this interaction, right? Jenna Ortega and Rachel Zegler don't respond in it, right? So this apparently drew a lot of backlash on the internet because this is what the internet does, right? Everybody has a platform to express their opinions. And listen, truthfully, I believe everybody has the right to express their opinion. Doesn't mean that we need to listen or validate it in any way possible. Doesn't mean somebody has the credentials or a point of view that is, worth even acknowledging. but they have the right to acknowledge it if they feel so, right? So I'm not here to tell people to shut up and whatever. Some of you need to probably, but you have every right to express yourself. So the creator here, Fernando, was reading some of the backlash and the comments that this video had gotten, and I found it to be a really interesting conversation because we had done the last show on here talking about being Latin enough, right? And kind of getting back to our roots a bit of what this podcast even is. This was like right on target with that. There's also another, there's a Pew Research article, there was a new Pew Research Center study that was conducted related to this. But let's just focus on this Dior story real quick before I get off topic. So one of the comments that the creator responds to here or showcases in regards to this is somebody said, quote, "One would think that all the noise that Jenna and Rachel made for the Latina representation, they'd at least speak Spanish." So this is somebody responding to that video, right? And this comment, there's two that infuriated the shit out of me when watching this video. This is one of them. This is the problem with our community and why we are so far fucking behind. It's people like this one. This person is literally shaming Jenna Ortega and Rachel Zegler for not speaking Spanish and actually shaming them and saying, "Oh, you've had the nerve to speak out on behalf of our community and fight for our right to be seen and to be heard, but you don't even speak Spanish?" Do you know how dumb you sound? So you're saying that this asinine rule, human-made, societal constructed rule that to be a real Latino, you have to speak Spanish, that supersedes the work that these actresses have been doing in Hollywood to make sure that our voices are heard and seen, and our faces seen, I should say. Like, what fucking world do people exist in? If it were up to you, we would never have a seat at the table because you're too interested in upholding asinine rules and this caste system that only divides us and continues to do the work of the racists out there because they love nothing more than us fighting amongst one another. Your point of view just feeds into that. How about saying, hey, even though they don't know Spanish, I still salute them for fighting on behalf of us for representation. Because regardless of their ability to speak Spanish, they're still doing work that is going to help elevate future generations and make sure that we have a seat at the table. Because that's what's more important than upholding some asinine rule that our culture has created. And moving on to the second comment from a person that really pissed me off on here. I'm kind of paraphrasing it, but their response to this video was bringing up the fact that many parents don't teach their kids Spanish and acknowledging that it's not the kid's fault. Many parents don't want them to face the critique that comes along with having an accent or not speaking English, right? So the person, first half of it I acknowledge. And they go on to then say, though, but that's it. They may have cultural heritage attached to being Latina, but they're Americans. They are not Latina. And I love the narcissism that exists where somebody else feels like they can tell you what you are or aren't. They're Americans. They're not Latina. Who the fuck are you to dictate that? Again, by what criteria? Because of where they were born and how they were brought up? Again, they're literally fighting for people like your dumbass to have representation, to have your story told so that you can see yourself in the things that media consumes, so that maybe we can break certain stereotypes about our culture, our community. But you're too caught up in what it means to be a real Latino, Latina. You're part of the problem if this is your mindset, right? You can be encouraging and you could say, I think it's incredible that these women have been fighting on behalf of us. I'd also love to see it if maybe they tried to learn a little Spanish as well and really embedded themselves further into the culture. That's a fair critique. I think that's a fair observation and a fair opinion because it's one based out of love. It's not saying you don't belong here unless it's saying, I appreciate all the work you're doing. I see you as one of us. I'd love for you to embrace the culture even deeper and find an even deeper connection to it. Because I agree. Part of what creates an attachment to my culture, my community that I've recognized, like as I've gone deeper, is when I do speak to people in Spanish, when I do make that effort, and I can feel that connection, that warmth that instantly happens when we connect in that way, right? If I go to a tourist area in Puerto Rico, or if I'm even here in the States, I'm in New York somewhere and I go to a Spanish restaurant and I speak to them in Spanish, there's an immediate sort of bond right there. And it's beautiful and I love it. I feel warm inside when I do that, when I'm able to, right? I get that. And that's a fair critique. And it's not even a critique. It's literally saying, I would love for you to be able to share in that same experience. That's all fine and good. But to say that these people are lesser than or don't belong to this community or are not of the culture, they're American, they're not like, come on. What is your end game with that statement? And this is like, not to turn this to an ad for the Just Be Social Club, but when I talk about conscious living, it's like leading with intention. Everything you fucking do, doing it with intention, right? So what is the intention behind that statement that you made where you tear down your fellow Latinas? It makes you feel good about yourself? That's that like what other intention could there possibly be? You've created a bit more exclusivity in your culture and your community. How does that serve anybody else but yourself and your own ego? Right? That's what bothers me at the end of the day is the short-sightedness that comes along with things like this. It's so fucking stupid and ridiculous, and it's why our history is lost, right? It's why, we don't hear about many of the heroes or our contributions throughout the course of history, is because the next generation that maybe would carry that torch, you've made them feel like they don't belong. Therefore, they're not going to ingratiate themselves in the culture, in the community, and feel the beautiful responsibility that it is to carry that torch. All because people like you shame them into feeling lesser than and feeling like they're not a part of this thing. When, regardless of what societal norms in our culture, community dictate, you can't take the bloodline, their ancestry out of it. The way they look, the experiences they have as a result of all of that. You can't take that away. Spanish speaking or not. They're a part of it regardless. And this leads out, before I, go off and just ripping into people who leave stupid comments, this leads perfectly into an article I found on wearb2.com talking about a new study, right? Where they say, a new study conducted by the Pew Research Center confirms statistics many Latinos living in the United States know all too well. Being a non-Spanish speaking Latino can be ostracizing, and fellow Latinos can make you feel bad for not being able to carry on conversations in Spanish. In fact, according to the study, 54% of Latinos who do not speak Spanish have felt, quote, shamed by their comunidad for not speaking the language. Non-Spanish speaking U.S. Latinos are often referred to as, quote, no Sabo kids, stemming from the wrong way of saying no sé or I don't know. And while the term was once derogatory, it has since been reclaimed, as reported by NBC. Many young Latinos do not speak Spanish and are taking back the no Sabo term on TikTok and running with it. And this shit I love, right? This is why this is life as a gringo. I'm running with the shit that you guys put on me. And you guys, the proverbial haters out there and gatekeepers of Latinness, right? Because this is just fucking ridiculous. And I can say from my own personal experience, it drove me further and further apart from my culture and my community. And I'm not putting all the blame on the people who have negatively critiqued my Latinness, right? Because obviously I allowed them to live it rent-free inside of my head. But at the same time, they are responsible for why I wasn't advocating or embracing or diving deeper into, right? I lost a lot of years of attachment to my community as a result of the lack of confidence I had because of people like these commenters. Had I have not had my come to Jesus moment when Hurricane Maria happened, I may have never truly, been as deep into my culture as I am right now. And this platform would have never been created. And I'm not saying I'm like, changing people's lives or anything like that, but I know I've made some people feel seen with this podcast, right? I've allowed others to feel comfortable tapping into their own Latinness and feeling seen and like they have a seat at the table now. Imagine if I allowed these people like these commenters to get to me in a way where I didn't do these things. Like this is what frustrates me is like you're potentially stopping the progress of our culture for no good reason whatsoever. Literally just to keep up this caste system that makes you feel good, makes you feel like you're a part of something and that you can be a gatekeeper and tell others they can't come in. That's ego. That's stupid. And it literally does nothing for this culture and this community that you are claiming to love so much or be a representative of, right? You're literally holding us back. Like, if that's your opinion, you need to step aside because you are part of the problem and part of the reason why our voices have been muted and we've been seen as nothing more than drug dealers and gang member number 2 in Hollywood, right? That's why. Because people like you have kept us in a box, and rather than celebrate those who are trying to tell our stories and showcase the diversity that exists in our community, you'd rather shame them back into hiding so that we continue to watch from the outside looking in. Again, you're the problem. You're holding us back from progression. Simple as that. Now, I'm quickly going to touch on this other story here. Tyson and Purdue under investigation by the Labor Department. I just think this is an interesting example to a lot of things I've been talking about, specifically on social media. I feel like I've been talking about it, but I've been talking about this on the podcast as well, right? So, Department of Labor is investigating meat and chicken processors Purdue and Tyson Foods following a New York Times Magazine report of minors working at the facilities. Earlier this year, the federal government committed to ratcheting up efforts to root out child labor law violations. Quote, there are currently wage and hour division investigations open at Purdue and Tyson Foods. A Department of Labor spokesperson told CNN no additional details can be provided as the investigation is ongoing. Now, earlier this month, the Times Magazine published the story of a migrant child who was severely injured while working for a sanitation company contracted by Purdue Slaughterhouse in Virginia. The in-depth report mentioned several other underage migrant workers, including some who worked at Tyson facilities. The Times later reported that the companies were under investigation. Now, first and foremost, empathy comes in. Your heart goes out to the fact that these kids, because they're children, have no choice but to go to work to help their family survive, right? That's first and foremost. But B, kind of bringing it home to a lot of the conversations when I've been talking about corporate greed. Look at these companies like Tyson and Purdue. And I'm going to do, as we're on the podcast, I'm just going to, right now, you can maybe hear me typing or you see it if you're watching the video. I'm going to type up Tyson Chicken CEO salary. Now, let's just see. I genuinely don't know. Okay. His salary, their salary, let's see, Donnie King, is a modest $12.014 million a year. Okay. Purdue Chicken CEO salary. Let's see. David Perdue is the CEO. I just pulled up a whole list from Forbes. Let's see here. His salary they're claiming is roughly around $1 million a year. But that's excluding all of the stock that he owns as well. Let's see. Okay, so $12 million, $1 million allegedly for Purdue. So these are wealthy people, obviously doing pretty well for themselves. The dude from Tyson, $12 million a year, obviously doing very well for themselves. Again, the Purdue salary is minus stock gains, which most CEOs, oftentimes, a lot of their salary comes from that. A lot of the money they make comes from these sort of stock gains. But either way, people who are being paid very well, right? And being compensated when the stock goes up, right? When profits are higher. So you have people in this country that are going to read this article and say, look, these migrants, they're taking our jobs, and now you have these migrant kids taking my job. Migrants are the problem. This is a perfect example of treating the wound rather than the disease. You are blaming migrants for taking your job, undercutting you essentially. You're blaming these people who have come here with nothing and are escaping some of the worst conditions known to man and are going to take whatever they can get to survive because it's better than where they came from, right? They have no choice. This is literally life or death for most of them. So you're blaming those people rather than zooming out and saying, maybe the problem isn't that desperate people are taking whatever they can get, which happens to be my job. Maybe the problem is corporate greed has normalized the idea that CEOs making millions upon millions of dollars and their investors and their board and all these rich elites are saying, we would rather cut employee costs as much as humanly possible, even if it puts Americans and local citizens out of work, just so we can drive our stock price up a little bit more and our investors and CEO can reap the benefits of it. Even though they are already wealthy beyond the fathom, beyond what any of us can fathom. Even though they're already doing incredibly well for themselves and are enjoying a very, very privileged life, their thought process is, life is great, but maybe I can be just a bit richer. Maybe I can move from number 12 on the Forbes list to number 9 if I just cut out a quarter of our workforce here at this company. Or if I replace the citizens that I have doing this job for me, and I ignore then, labor laws, and I then just take advantage of the most disenfranchised people by barely paying them anything, right? Those are the real villains, because they're not doing this because Purdue Chicken and Tyson Chicken and the car companies and whomever else, right? They're not making these cuts to their staff or salaries or hiring illegally, people who are just, in need of anything at this point. They're not preying on those people because they need to in order for their company to survive. No, they're doing it to feed their greed. They are already making millions of dollars a year in salary. The company itself is already doing well. Its investors are already doing well. But they just want to do even better because their greed is insatiable. They are the problem. And the politicians who are getting kickbacks from these corporations, whose campaigns are being funded by these corporations, are trying to convince you that the migrant worker who is fighting for their life, literally, is to blame because they've accepted this low-paying job because anything is better than where they came from. Yes, they're the problem, not the incredibly wealthy CEO who has more money than they will ever need, but still wants to find ways to bring in more of a profit and more of a bonus for themselves, even at the expense of their employees and the quality of their product. That's your real enemy. Stop being a pawn in the system. You're being told that it's the migrant worker who's undercutting you, that they are your enemy. You're being told this by a person who has to rely on these CEOs in order for the survival of their own political campaigns, their own agendas, and their ultimate power, right? They have a horse in this race. So they're going to tell you whatever they need to in order to get the results that they're looking for, the results that lead to them staying in power. Wake up. The migrant worker, the everyday person, your neighbor who votes differently than you, they are not the enemy. It is the people sitting at the top feeding you lies in order to protect their own bottom line. They are the enemy. It is the people whose greed knows no boundaries. And even though they have more money than they will ever spend in their entire life, still feels the need and has no problem with uprooting the lives of the everyday worker just to drive up their stock prices, just so they can buy a second yacht, just so they can buy a third, fourth, fifth vacation home on some exotic island. They're willing to do all of that selfishly at the expense of the everyday person because they don't give a damn about you. And the people that are supposed to be giving a damn about you are in bed with them and are getting their pockets lined and getting their needs met by the corporate greed. Wake up. That's the real enemy. They are buying the system and making sure that it works for them far more than it works for us, the everyday person. And it's not out of necessity or survival, like what migrants are doing, who are literally fighting for their lives. These people, the corporate elites, are taking advantage of you, putting you out of work, uprooting the lives of yourself and your families, not because they have to, but because their greed knows no boundaries. Wake up. That's what's going on. Whew. Now, with that said, we're going to take a little break here. I would say we lighten things up, but there's just a conversation to be had here. All right, so normally in our Mi Gente segment, I would have like an amazing story from our community. And honestly, this one like isn't all negative. I'm just torn on it, right? So let's have a conversation. So you have Sofia Vergara, who is taking on the role of Griselda Blanco, who is known as the cocaine grandmother. She is a famous drug lord, and she is also producing the series on top of acting in it, right? And she's explaining to Vogue Mexico y Latino America that she always dreamed of bringing an all Latino cast together. And she said, of course, producing Griselda gave her the perfect opportunity, saying, quote, I always dreamed of producing and being able to bring all of who I consider to be the best actors in Latin America. We mix Chicanos, Cubans, Venezuelans, Argentinians, and of course, Colombians. While Vergara's stunning portrayal of Griselda Blanco may earn her some award show nods, the show's cast is her proudest accomplishment, saying, quote, all of the people in the series are from Latin America. I really wanted to be able to do a project like this one. And listen, beautiful. On the surface, it is a beautiful, beautiful thing. Having an all Latin cast, you have a Latin woman leading it, a Latin woman producing it. Incredible. I believe it's going to be on Netflix. All great stuff. I celebrate that. So that's the positive side of things. On the other side of it, it's the story that's being told. We already have this sort of negative connotation and stereotype in Hollywood about being drug dealers, being criminals. And those stories have traditionally not been hard to get made, right? Hollywood has had no problem in our portrayal in those characters. They've celebrated it, right? They've glorified it. So it's not like you fought for a story like the Flaming Hot Cheetos story or even the one with the astronaut, which I just finished with. Is it Jose Peña? Is his name? I don't want to fuck that up because he did an incredible job with that movie. Michael Peña did an amazing job with that movie. I think it's called 1,000 Miles Away. An incredible movie. Those stories, I'm sure behind the scenes you had to fight to get them told. The story of a narcos, of a crime, lord who's, we've seen a bunch on true crime TV. They've never had a problem telling those stories. So this is where I'm torn. And I don't want to be like too woke in all of this. I don't want to say that things like this don't have their place, especially if you're going to tell the story accurately, right? Where it's not just celebrating this person as some sort of hero, but showcasing the complexity of the human being, right? And I think Narcos with Pablo Escobar, they did some of that. But again, this isn't really groundbreaking. I love that it's a Latin cast. I love that it's a Latin woman producing it and leading in the role. But it perpetuates a stereotype that is far too common for our people, specifically Colombians. I'm torn, and I feel like we're past this. I feel like somebody like Sofia Vergara is so well established, such a box office draw or such a TV draw, right? She could have done a number of different stories. And I'm not saying that this probably isn't going to be great or interesting or entertaining. I'm sure it will be. But to me, you've already reached the pinnacle. Why not challenge yourself if your real purpose here is I want to elevate Latin voices and actors? Why not make them a part of a project that they can be proud of beyond like the performance itself, right? Because I'm sure everybody's giving their best performances here. But why not be proud of it from a standpoint of we fought to have a story told, to see ourselves in something, and we were able to make that happen, right? That to me is something far more to be proud of than a story that would have been made regardless if it was a Latina producing it or not, right? There's an endless supply of these Narcos type of movies and TV shows and true crime and everything. So that's where I'm torn on. And this isn't a critique on Sofia Vergara. I think, she's obviously done amazing things. I think she's kind of broken the mold a little bit. And her role in Modern Family and that being such a big show. And I believe she was at one point the highest paid actress on television, if I'm not mistaken. That's incredible. And she did it all with an accent. I think it's beautiful. But again, this sort of falls short for me. And I'm torn on whether or not it's a moment to celebrate or a moment to sort of hold up the mirror a little bit. And I'm open to either sort of topic of conversation and opinion. I'm really just throwing this out there and giving you like a real raw, honest response to, my personal thoughts when I was reading this article, when I saw it pop up, and it's food for thought. I'm open to hearing different points of view or what anybody else thinks. Maybe we'll do a poll on my Instagram at DJ Dramos. Now, with that said, let's tie everything we talked about today in a neat little bow in a segment we call Conclusion Stew.
Time for Conclusion Stew.
All right, so the story out of Texas where you had the former homecoming queen being banned from her high school, not being able to continue the tradition of passing on the homecoming crown to the new queen, all because of a sash that she wore celebrating her Mexican heritage that was not approved by the dress code of her graduation the previous year. Nonsense. I mean, I think this story is a couple things. Like, I wonder if it wasn't a brown person celebrating their brownness, if this would be the same issue. At the same time, it again speaks to the problem with schooling where they don't celebrate people's individualities. They don't want to send these kids out into the world with confidence in who they are. They want to suppress you into having to follow the rules and minimize any sort of celebration of who you are, regardless of if you put in the work like these kids have when they're walking across the stage at graduation. Who the fuck cares what their sash looks like? As long as it doesn't have anything offensive on it, what's the problem? They've earned that right to add one single piece of individuality to the uniform of the graduation gown that everybody else is wearing. You couldn't let her have that. And then on top of that, you want to hold a grudge and ban her from tradition and color her whole entire high school experience now from this moment because you are salty that she wore this sash and got away with it. Like, it's just fucking stupid and silly. And it speaks to the problem with our school system in this country and probably a lot of the undertones of racism as well, right? Now, this topic of not being Latin enough, I mean, we've beaten this to death, I feel like, at this point, but this was a great example. The Pew Research Center shows that many of us feel this way. And anybody gatekeeping this idea of what it means to be Latin, I reiterate, you're part of the problem. Like, these women in Jenna Ortega and Rachel Zegler are advocating for us to have representation in an industry that has whitewashed our stories traditionally. And you are rushing, tripping over each other to critique them and to shame them because they don't meet this asinine standard that you've set. Like, you silencing people like this and shaming them into not celebrating their Latinness, not fighting on behalf of us, only makes us go backwards. It halts the progression that's been happening in Hollywood, entertainment, media as a whole. So when we don't have a seat at the table, our voices are not being heard, our stories are getting whitewashed, you only have yourself to blame at the end of the day. Because you decided to uphold this asinine caste system and gatekeep what it means for somebody to have an attachment to their culture and their community. Just stupid at the end of the day. And this whole thing with Tyson and Purdue under investigation for child workers and migrant children workers. Again, I think it's just like a good example of corporate greed. People are pointing the finger and putting the spotlight in all the wrong places as per usual. You're getting angry at these migrant workers who are just trying to survive. And if you really have a problem with your job being given away or wages being cut because someone else is willing to work cheaper, why don't you critique the people who are making those decisions, who are already rich, but are literally just trying to squeeze every penny that they possibly can, and they don't care who they have to step on to do it. These are millionaires who are okay with destroying the lives of their workers or uprooting their lives or sending it into turmoil by taking their jobs away or by not paying them a fair, livable wage. They're willing to step on the everyday person just to add a couple more bucks to their bank account. And again, in the case of the migrants who are literally doing this because their life depends on it, the corporate CEOs are literally just doing it because they're greedy. You tell me where the problem is, right? You tell me which side is wrong here. Which is the face of the problem in this country? The face of evil. It should be very clear and very obvious for anybody who can separate politics and just think logically. But again, that's not what they want. They stir the pot. Your neighbor who votes differently is evil. The migrants who are just trying to survive are the problem. And it forces us all to move on to the next shiny thing and ignore the fact that the politicians are just protecting the corporations that contribute to their campaigns, thus help keep them in power. One hand is washing the other. Meanwhile, they're stepping on the everyday person in the process. That's what we have to recognize. Wake up, America. And lastly, this whole story with Sofia Vergara and bringing the story of Griselda Bianco to life, or Griselda Blanco, I should say, to life. I'm torn. I really, really am. I'm happy for her. I'm happy for all the Latino actors and actresses who are going to get work out of this, and for Sofia to be able to get that producer credit. I just wish it was amidst a story that we could stand by and be proud of, and also one that Hollywood wouldn't have easily given us. Hollywood, again, has had no problem with telling the stories that paint us to be gangsters and criminals. That's very easily made. It's the real stories about our culture, our community, and our voices. Those are the hard ones that are actually, we have to fight for to get made. So to me, someone like Sofia Vergara, with the power that she has, that's what she should be focusing her energy on and be standing by proudly. Not a story like this one, which again, I still love her, salute her. I just think there's a mirror that needs to be held up just a little bit. And we all need that sometimes. But that's my 2 cents on that. At DJ Dramos if you feel differently. And man, that's it. Our Just Be Social Club. We are closing doors on the new offer tomorrow, Friday the 29th. So if you want to be a part of it, go to the website, justbe.nyc, click Social Club, click Apply Now. You can schedule the free one-on-one with myself and our business partner, Brenda. We'll see if it's a good fit. And if it is, we'll get started in October with the new group. And that's it, man. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. Have an amazing weekend, amazing Latin Heritage Month. And I will catch you on Tuesday. So then, stay safe. Peace.